is what generation should this VM be? 1 or 2? This is a property of the VM itself, and it's an irreversible decision. Once that VM has been created, there's no switching generations. Now, the generation is important because it's going to determine the kind of hardware and the features that VM supports. The biggest difference between these two generations is the hardware layer and how that hardware layer is mimicked in our VMs. Generation 1 machines, the older style here, is emulation based. It uses standard drivers to emulate the typical hardware found in a machine. That emulation layer comes with a little bit of overhead, especially when you are booting up a machine or installing an operating system. Generation 2 VMs, on the other hand, use synthetic drivers and are software based, so there is no emulation layer, and that's why Gen 2 machines give us better install and boot performance. Generation 2 VMs also give us access to a lot of great features, like the ability to boot from a VHDX, which can be 64 terabytes in size and GPT partitioned, and also supports online resizing. It also uses UEFI firmware, which gives us access to secure boot, which ensures that our drivers are digitally signed, so nothing malicious could happen prior to the operating system loading. It also supports PXE booting natively with the high-performance synthetic software-based network adapter. Generation 1 machines support the synthetic NIC, but if you want to do any form of PXE booting, then you have to use the slower emulated legacy network adapter. And there's many other benefits that Gen 2 machines bring to the table. The bottom line is you'll want to use Generation 2 wherever possible. About the only reason you would use Generation 1 today is if you need to support an older operating system. Generation 2 does not support Windows 7, Server 2008, on the Linux side, FreeBSD, or you need to support 32-bit operating systems. Generation 2 machines do not support 32-bit OSs. All right, with that, let's jump into the virtual lab. We'll learn how to create both Gen 1 and Gen 2 machines and highlight some more differences along the way, and we'll get some practice here creating both Windows and Linux VMs. Let's set the stage for our 4-machine lab. We have our 2 Hyper-V hosts that we spun up in previous nuggets. HV1NUG, again, is our server with the desktop experience Hyper-V host. HV2NUG is our nano server Hyper-V host. We're going to create 4 VMs total here, 2 on each host. Our HV1NUG machine is going to host both of our Server 2016 virtual machines. The first one we'll create here is called CoreNUG. This will be a server core VM, and this will be a Generation 1 VM. Our second one will be GUINUG. This will be a server with the desktop experience VM, and this one will be a Gen 2 machine. Our second Hyper-V host, which is our nano server, is going to support both of our Linux machines. The first one we're going to create here is going to be called LNX-NUG for Linux NUG, and it's going to be a Gen 2 machine, and it's going to be running CentOS. I have an older distribution of CentOS available to us. We're going to install that, and then we're going to need to get the Linux Integration Services package installed. We'll get the latest version installed so we can get those performance benefits and get better integration between our host and our guest. Our second Linux VM is going to be BSD-NUG. This is going to be FreeBSD that we're going to install on it, and this must be a Generation 1 NUG machine because FreeBSD is unsupported on Generation 2. And this is the latest release, so I won't take you through the process of installing the FreeBSD integration services, but I'll show you how you can get there. And as you may have guessed, we're not going to be doing any form of management locally on our Hyper-V host. We're going to be doing it all remotely from our admin NUG machine, and that's where we're going to begin. So let's go ahead and paste our password in and log in. Let's begin on admin NUG by launching into Hyper-V Manager. We'll start in the GUI, and then we'll make our way over to PowerShell. We can get there the quick and easy way by right-clicking on the Start button, heading up to Run, and typing in virtmgmt.msc. That'll launch us right in to Hyper-V Manager. Make sure that you choose HV1NUG. That's where we're going to put both of our Windows machines. Give that a right-click and choose New Virtual Machine. That'll launch us into a very nice and easy-to-use wizard here. Give that, before you begin, a quick read-through and hit Next. Next, we need to specify our name. Let's start with our CoreNUG machine. So type in CoreNUG for the name. Notice that our default location is holding up. We set that when we configured our Hyper-V hosts, so they will get planted on our REFS formatted V volume. And then go ahead and choose Next. Here's where we choose our Generation 1 or 2. Let's go with 1 here for CoreNUG, so make sure the first one is selected there and hit Next. For memory, let's give this 2 gigs to start with. We'll talk about dynamic memory down the road. Then I'll get immediately following this one. We'll get all into that. So for now, let's leave it empty and hit Next. We're also going to configure networking down the road. We've got nuggets dedicated to networking. So for now, we'll leave this empty. We'll come back and reconfigure these VMs down the road and choose Next. Now we need to specify our hard disk, right? This is going to be our boot disk for this machine. So let's give it, how about 30 gigs there? Everything else looks good, and hit Next. That'll create a brand new VHDX for this machine. Next up is an operating system. We're going to choose to install an operating system from a bootable CD or DVD-ROM drive. This is also something that Gen 1 gives us, is the ability to attach to a physical DVD drive, which we do not have attached to this machine, which is why this option is not available. But for Gen 2 machines, this option is never available. You can only hook in to ISOs. So we're going to go ahead and browse the file system here, choose image file, hit browse, and this will plant to right into the vVolume on HV1 NUG where we have all of our ISOs. So I've got an ISO here for CentOS, for FreeBSD. Here's a Server 2016 eval, and then we have Linux integration services. And I have these both on the V drive on both HV1 NUG and HV2 NUG. So you'll see the same result here no matter which Hyper-V host we're on. And let's go ahead and choose Windows Server 2016 for Core NUG here and hit open. All right, now we can go ahead and choose next, and we're done. Hit finish, and that's going to create the VM, all the components, and also attach that ISO to our DVD drive. Now let's see what that wizard did. Let's right click on our VM and head into settings. This is going to look a lot different than a Gen 2 machine, as you'll see here shortly. Number one, we have BIOS instead of UEFI. We have IDE controllers, and it also does support SCSI controllers. We have COM controllers on here, and we even have a floppy drive. If you choose add hardware, you'll notice that we have this network adapter is the synthetic network adapter, but we also have the legacy network adapter. Let's do one thing to this machine here. Let's add a data drive to this machine. And we'll just add this to our existing IDE controller here along with our boot disk. So choose IDE controller and choose to add a hard drive. Here we're going to create a brand new VHDX. This will launch into the wizard, so we'll choose next. We'll make this a VHDX and hit next. Our disk type will make this a thinly provisioned dynamically expanding disk, so hit next. Let's give this the name. How about we'll call this Core NUG _ data 1, and that'll get planted in the same location there. Hit next, and since this is going to be dynamically expanding, can be whatever size we want. Let's just make it 100 gigs here. Choose next and finish. Done. We've now added a data drive to this machine. All right, so let's go ahead and hit OK. And now, before starting this and installing an operating system, let's get GUI NUG going. That way we can fire them both up at the same time and install an operating system simultaneously. And let's create that GUI NUG machine using PowerShell. So we need to launch the ISE with elevated privileges. So give that PowerShell icon on the taskbar a right click and choose to run the ISE as an administrator. Choose yes to user account control. And mine was launched in the background here. I'm just going to give that a click to fire it up. Hit that open button on the toolbar, which will plant you into the Nugget Lab directory. And let's open up our PS commands script. Let's begin by getting into a PowerShell session over on HV1 NUG. So we'll run an interactive session here using enter PS session. Go split screen here. And the first thing we're going to do is create a Gen 2 VM. We can use the new VM commandlet for that. We'll give it the name GUI NUG, specify 2 gig of startup memory, specify our new VHD path there going into that VMs directory on the vVolume. We'll give it the name GUI NUG.vhdx. We'll give it 40 gigs in size, and notice here that this will be a Generation 2 VM. So we'll give that an execute. It'll just take a second to fire up that VM, and that's it. It's done. That only took a few seconds. And if we head back here into Hyper-V Manager, there it is. Let's do everything else we did there with Core NUG using PowerShell. So we're going to add a new SCSI controller onto our VM. We're going to add a DVD drive to that VM and also mount that Server 2016 installation media right to that DVD drive. We're also going to attach this to our controller that we just created above. All right, so that'll do that. And then we're going to create a data disk here. We'll call this GUI NUG _ data 1. It'll be 100 gigabytes and dynamic, just like we did there with Core NUG. And then finally, what we need to do is add that disk to that machine. So that just created the VHD. Now we're going to add that VHD to our VM. There we go. And now we can fire it up. Just to show you, we could fire it up and then exit out of our session. We'll do this through the GUI. So go ahead and just exit your session there, and we can close out of the ISE and head back into Hyper-V Manager. Now let's right-click on GUI NUG and head into Settings. Notice here it's a lot smaller. We have UEFI firmware. Secure boot is supported and enabled by default. We have no IDE controllers, just SCSI controllers, and it's just a lot simpler and more modern. In fact, if we choose hardware here, we do not have the legacy network adapter. We only have the synthetic network adapter available. Also notice here that our data drive was attached successfully to our SCSI controller, so we have our boot drive and our data drive ready to go. All right, now let's highlight both of these in Hyper-V Manager, right-click and choose Start. That'll fire them both up at the same time. We can also right-click and choose Connect. That'll give us 2 VM Connect windows right on our machine. So on the left here, we have Core NUG, and on the right, we have GUI NUG. And for GUI NUG here, just hit Enter twice, and that'll boot from the DVD. Core NUG should boot up automatically. So on GUI NUG here, I'm going to go ahead and just hit Next and Install Now. Then we'll flip over to Core NUG. We'll do the same thing. Next, Install Now. You've seen enough installations at this point that I won't need to walk you through it. But I'll rip through this real quick. And then, you know what, a really good test here is we're running GUI NUG, which is much slower installing the desktop experience, on Gen 2. We're installing Core NUG, which is server core, much quicker install experience on Gen 1. And the funny thing is these will actually take about the same amount of time to install, which proves that Gen 2 is much faster than Gen 1. So for GUI NUG here, we're going to make sure you choose Data Center Desktop Experience. And for Core NUG, make sure you just choose Data Center. That will install server core. All right, so both of those look good. I'm going to go ahead and choose Next on Core NUG and then Next on GUI NUG. We'll need to accept the EULA on both of these as well. Accept it, hit Custom, and install it to the first disk on both of these machines. Again, this is our primary partition where the operating system will go. So GUI NUG will go ahead and use that 40 gig disk. Core NUG will use the 30 gig disk, and that's it. They are now off and running. So I'll just give this a second. This is kind of a fun little exercise because you can put these next to each other and just watch their percentages fly. And you'll see GUI NUG will actually keep up here with Core NUG. Mine just finished up, and Core NUG did beat GUI NUG to the punch by about 30 seconds. Your results may vary. But look at that. We created 2 Windows VMs on our HV1 NUG host. Feel free to take this the rest of the way. Supply an administrator password, log in, change their computer names, and even perform a license conversion using DISM and an AVMA key, an automatic virtual machine activation key. I'll give you the commands for both of those. I will do all of that prior to our next nugget. So we'll have both of these machines ready to go, fully activated, named, and ready to manage. So let's go ahead and close out of both of these, and let's head over to HV2 NUG and create some Linux machines. We'll create both of these using the GUI, and let's start with CentOS so I can show you how to install Linux integration services as well. I'm going to right-click on HV2 NUG, head over to New, Create Virtual Machine, hit Next here at the opening screen. Let's call this one LNX-NUG. Everything else is good. Hit Next. We're going to make this one a Generation 2 machine because it is supported, and choose Next. Memory here, let's also give this one 2 gigs there. Hit Next. Nothing for networking. For our VHD here, let's give this one, how about 30 gigabytes? Everything else looks good. Next. We need to browse to our ISO here, so make sure you choose to install an operating system from a bootable image file. Browse there to the V drive on HV2 NUG into ISOs, and there is CentOS, the very first one. Go ahead, hit Open, Next, and Finish. Now, before we attempt to fire this machine up and install CentOS, there's one thing we need to do, and that is disable or configure Secure Boot. Let's disable it for now because we're going to talk about it in a future nugget, and we'll learn how to configure it. So let's go into the settings for this machine, choose Security, and notice here that it's enabled by default and targeting Windows machines. Let's just go ahead and turn it off and then hit OK. Now we can successfully fire this machine up. I'm just going to right-click, choose Connect, and then hit the power button there on the toolbar. That'll fire it up, and on the initial screen here, we want to go up and choose to install CentOS Linux 7. I'm also going to go ahead, drop down that View menu, and let's go in to full screen mode. The initial screen in the installation wizard is going to ask you to choose your language. I'll stick with the defaults there. Scroll down to the bottom and hit Continue. The only thing required on our next screen here is to choose our installation destination. You can just open this up. It'll default to our disk and hit Done. And now we can move to the next step of the wizard. Choose Begin Installation down there on the bottom. The only thing we need to do here is supply a password for the root. So for the root user here, I'm going to go ahead and just type in our standard lab password twice. It's going to say, that's a weak password. And if you scroll down to the message at the bottom, it'll let you know here that the dictionary check fails. If you want this password, press Done twice to confirm it. So with our lab password entered, I'm going to hit Done once and then twice, and now we're done. And you can see your installation progress down here at the bottom. This will just take about 10 to 15 minutes to install. When you're all set, hit that reboot button at the bottom to complete installation. Once it comes back up, let's go ahead and log into CentOS here with the root account. Use the password that you supplied during installation, and we are now on the machine. And the first thing we're going to do here is let's rename this machine. So we'll do a hostname, CTL, set hostname, and let's call this Linux NUG, LNX-NUG. And there we go. We now have a new machine. We can verify that here by just running a hostname. We are now Linux NUG, and that'll get reflected here when we reboot with our login. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is let's just take a peek at what's on this. Let's run an ls mod here. And you'll see we do have the Hyper-V drivers loaded, but they're on an old version. In fact, we can drill in, and this won't scroll automatically. You need to scroll down here. We can drill into these by running an sbin /sbin /mod info. And let's just take a look at the HV_VM bus here. And what this will show us, notice there's no version here. There should be a version for Linux integration services. So we have all the default drivers, and our goal here is to upgrade this to the latest version of Linux integration services so we get all those sweet integration service features. And of course, better performance. So let's start here by mounting that ISO to the DVD drive. So let's drop down the media menu here, choose DVD drive, choose insert disk, and let's browse to the V volume, ISOs, and here is the latest version of Linux Integration Services 4.2. So I'm going to hit open, and now we're going to mount the directory inside of there so we can get access to the install.sh script that will install Linux Integration Services. So what we need to do here is just run a mount /dev/cd-rom, and let's mount it to the media directory. So make sure you put a space here right after cd-rom. All right, so that'll mount it to the media directory, and now we can cd to that directory. And now if we run an ls, there's what we need right there, install.sh. So here's Linux Integration Services for all the supported OSs there. And so down here, all we need to do now is just run a /install.sh. That will just take a second to install the Linux Integration Services 4.2 onto our CentOS machine. Once that's done, our final step here is to reboot the system, and that's as simple as executing the reboot command. And there we go. Linux Integration Services has now been installed. Once that comes back up, we can log in once again here with root and our password. And now if we recall a few commands ago, back to our sbin mod info, and we take a look at the HV-VM bus, we can now see that our version is 4.2.1. Perfect. Now, I should also mention when you download the Linux Integration Services package from Microsoft's download area, it also comes with a PDF containing installation instructions to do exactly what we just did. All right, let's move on to FreeBSD. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of our VM Connect here for our Linux NUG machine. And now we're going to need to make a Generation 1 machine here for FreeBSD. So let's go New, Virtual Machine, walk through this wizard again here. We'll call this one BSD NUG. Choose Next. The generation here must be 1 for FreeBSD, so we'll choose Next. We'll give this 2 gigs of memory as well here. Hit Next. Don't worry about networking. Our disk here, let's go ahead and make this 30 gigs as well. Hit Next. And then we'll choose to install an operating system here, and we'll browse to our ISO file. This time, when you hit Browse, choose FreeBSD 11. This is the latest version of BSD, and also has the latest version of BSD Integration Services installed and ready to go. So let's go ahead and hit Next and Finish. Now we can connect to this machine, power it on, and run through an installation, which is pretty straightforward. You can accept all the defaults, and once you're done, you'll have access to a BSD VM. So feel free to run through an installation. I'm not going to bore you with the details here. Again, it is pretty straightforward. But I do want to mention that if you want to install BSD Integration Services, right now, as of this recording, the link is actually broken. And just to show you what I mean here, I have a browser open right on the Microsoft docs here for Linux and FreeBSD. If you scroll down on the left and choose FreeBSD VMs, scroll down here. This will show us all the supported versions. Notice we have Linux Integration Services built in from 10 and up. If you're on an older version, though, you will need to install these ports, as they're called. And if you click on this right now, as of this recording, these links are actually broken, and they've been broken for about a week now. So I wouldn't be able to show you this if I could, but I am going to give you a link to a page that will walk you through installation and configuration of BSD Integration Services on these older distributions. Also, if we choose CentOS over here on the left, you can see what is supported as far as this goes. And you can also access the download packages for Linux Integration Services 4.1 and 4.2 directly on this page. So here's 4.2. Here's what I downloaded here onto our local machine. And that's what we just used to bring that CentOS up to 4.2. What I want to show you here is the details. This will actually show you what comes with Linux 4.2.1. And if you hit download, here is that PDF I was talking about that'll walk you through the installation instructions. There's the ISO. That's what we use. And you can also get the compressed form of